Guys, start.
Diana. Professor, is Diana in here?
Diana is here.
Yeah, I think her mic was muted.
Diana?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we hear you now.
Okay, perfect. Okay, hi everyone. My name is Diana Sanchez, and this is my team. Basically, our presentation is based on ACE and adult mental health. It's me, Megan, and Kinsley, and Gabriella as well. So next slide, please. Let's get to it. So introduction. Basically, what our presentation is about is exposure to childhood adversity, which is a potent risk towards adult mental health, mostly caused by common forms of adversity. For example, traumatic experiences involving harm or threat to a child, that which can be done by a parent or a role model or a teacher or anyone who's basically in a role of taking care of the child. So the common forms of adversity are the following that you see here. It says physical abuse, sexual abuse, domestic violence, exposure to violence in home and around your community. I did write something underneath which says exposure to such experiences can cause self-deprivation and future social disadvantage, causing a person to feel neglected by the community and anyone in their household. Also, I did add don't ask, don't tell in areas where there is frequent violence. This is a known form being around areas that have a lot of crimes and poverty. A lot of Hispanics and Black communities, usually when you see a child being abused or hit by a parent, um, you're asked not to say anything about it or involve yourself because it's not your child and that's just their way of raising them. And we're going to get more into that in the next slide, but here you see the next slide is going to show more depth in a concept of how childhood adversity is basically a negative contribution to any individual who goes through it. So next slide, please. So what is child abuse and neglect?
I'm sorry, I'm having technical difficulties right now.
Maybe did you download the presentation and don't have any other windows open, please?
I don't have any other windows open. It just did it by itself.
Okay, just close any window that's irrelevant, and we still see the
Yeah, but you got to exit the email.
Yeah, close any application that's open on your computer.
Perfect. So this slide is basically what is child abuse and neglect. So child abuse and neglect are serious public health problems that a lot of communities go through today. And basically ACEs, it stands for adverse childhood experiences, and it can have a long-term impact on health and well-being. This issue includes all types of abuse and neglect against a child under the age of 18. So 18 or under is usually when it happens, mostly when you're even between 3 and 12 years old. That basically it's the neglect or the abuse can come from a parent, a caregiver, or another person in a custodial role, such as a religious leader, a coach, a teacher, and that results in harm, potential for harm, or a threat of harm to the child. So the 4 common types of abuse and neglect are, you see on the right side, which were the ones I mentioned in the previous slide. Physical abuse is the intentional use of physical force on a child, which is hitting, kicking, shaking, burning, or any force against a child. Sexual abuse involves pressuring or forcing a child to engage in sexual acts that they don't want to participate in, like fondling, penetration, or exposing a child to sexual activities when they're not prepared for that. Emotional abuse refers to behaviors that harm a child's self-worth. So like name calling, shaming, rejection, withholding love from them, and basically threatening them to follow your rules and saying that there's consequences to not following what you say. So, and neglect, which is a big deal as well, is the failure to meet a child's basic physical and emotional needs. which is just housing, food, clothing, education, and access to medical care. Next slide, please. So what are ACEs? So we know that ACEs is basically a condensed version of just adverse childhood experiences. So adverse childhood experiences, we explained that there are traumatic events that are occurring before the age of 18. And there was a landmark study in the 1990s that found a significant relationship between the number of ACEs a person experiences and a variety of negative outcomes in adulthood. So it could be poor physical health in the future after going through traumatic events as a child. And it can also result into substance abuse and just risky behaviors and getting into trouble. So on the right side, you see I wrote ACEs stand for adverse childhood experiences, which is something, you know, we should all know by now. I did write what ACEs does. They conduct current studies and they analyze relationships. And then they have an ACE score, which is score, which is something that we're going to get into more in the next slides. And it basically explains categories, and it tries to establish a need for prevention. So an ACE score is a tally of different types of abuse, neglect, or other hallmarks of a rough childhood. According to the ACE, the rougher your childhood, the higher your score is likely to be, and the higher your risk for later health problems. So next slide, please. So these are the three types of ACEs that you see. So it's under three categories. You see abuse, neglect, and household dysfunction. You see on the abuse side, it shows, you know, physical, emotional, sexual abuse. Neglect can be physical and emotional. And then household dysfunction, it's mostly getting into, it could be someone who is constantly in and out of prison, which could be an incarcerated relative, anyone in the family who you live with who has mental issues, a mother who is treated violently and who, or possibly being beaten by your father or their spouse or their partner, like constant substance abuse of anyone in your household. And then another big thing is divorce. Next slide, please. So I decided to do most common experiences and then the possible future effects that it can have as a child goes into adulthood. So the most common recorded experiences, and even in this area, I searched for a couple of stats. It just said sexual abuse, emotional neglect, physical abuse, physical neglect, mental illness, incarceration, parental separation and divorce, or witnessing violence against their mother, which is what we saw in the previous slide. So then I decided to research that shows individuals that go through 4 or more adverse childhood experience are mostly likely to 2 times more likely to smoke cigarettes, 4 times more likely to engage in drug abuse, 7 times more likely to suffer from chronic alcoholism, and it just keeps getting higher. 11 times more likely to abuse drugs or injections, and then 19 times more likely to attempt suicide, which is a really, it's a really big deal, and it's actually insane and very sad. So next slide, please. How does childhood experience affect adult mental health? So in bold letters, I put adverse experiences are proven to affect behavior in adult life and increase the risk of physical and mental health problems. The larger of numbers of detrimental childhood experiences correlate with higher risk of health issues. 2 important points is that adults who suffer child abuse usually visit the doctor more often through their adulthood. They have more surgery more often, and they're more chronic to health conditions. And also, traumatic events can also alter the immune system. It can affect quality of sleep as you grow up and lower the pain threshold, meaning like you have less tolerance for pain. And it also results in negative adult behaviors in the way you communicate with other people. A fun fact that I put on the side, which is not really so fun, but it says ACEs are costly. These experiences can increase the risk of injury, sexually transmitted infections, maternal and child health problems, teen pregnancy, involvement in sex trafficking, a wide range of chronic diseases, and leading causes of death, such as cancer, diabetes, heart disease, and suicide. Next slide, please. So this picture is also important because I did explain the behaviors. The effect of behaviors it can have on an adult is lack of physical activity, as in you don't care about your self-image, you don't want to work out. It's because, you know, carrying that burden with you from a childhood to adulthood, it can weigh on the person you are today. And it just makes you feel like it brings down your like confidence, and it just, you know, doesn't make you want to do anything. And also smoking and alcoholism is basically like you're starting to use substance abuse to cope with those things. And then it's also known as behavior to miss work, to call out, not be responsible. It's just not wanting to participate in regular daily activities, you know? And physical and mental health, you're gonna see in the bottom part, it's severe obesity, diabetes, depression, suicide attempts, STDs, heart disease, cancer, strokes, broken bones. So these are just so many things and negative effects that, you know, a child who's been through abuse and neglect can possibly get into when they're older. And it's just, it's sad to see how many different things can affect and get to this part of you know, physical and mental health and how much it affects it. So this is just a part of the introduction, and the next slide is going to be Gabriella.
Okay, so methods, data, and sample. Data for this study was drawn from Wave 2 of the CDC CASER ACE studies collected in 1997. The sample consists of adult members of CASER, a large healthcare maintenance organization in Southern California seeking route health checks at an outpatient clinic. The majority of the sample was Caucasian, which was 75.2%, followed by 10.7% Hispanic, 7.6 Asian, 4.1 Black, and 2.4 other races or ethnicities. Over half of the participants, which was 53.3, were females. Ages range from 19 to 97 years old. Measurements. The Family Health History Questionnaire used in the original ACE study consists of multiple items assisting exposure to 10 traditional ACE, including abuse, sexual, emotional, and physical, neglect, physical and emotional, and household challenges, which include mother treated violently, household mental illness, incarcerated family member, household substance abuse, parental separation or divorce, experienced during the first 18 years of life, as well as being spanked as a child. These items were selected and adapted for validated clinical measurements of sexual history, violence, and traumatic childhood experience. The preface to the question is, sometimes parents spank their children as a form of discipline. While you were growing up during your first 18 years of life, how often were you spanked? 5 response options were available. 1, never spanked. 2, spanked once or twice throughout childhood. 3, spanked a few times a year. 4, spanked many times a year. And 5, spanked weekly or more. Spanking was coded as yes if the responses reported being spanked a few times per year, many times per year, or weekly or more. A component score was created for each participant by summoning the 11 constructed ACE variables. ACE scores values ranges from 0 to 11, corresponding to the total number of ACE experienced by the participant. So the adult mental health impairment, self-reported street drugs were used. Lifetime drugs used were defined as responding yes to the question, have you ever used street drugs? Also, it was reported that moderate to heavy drinking, which was typically weekly alcohol consumption during each of the following ages, was obtained for each participant, which was 19 to 50 years old. Lifelong moderate to heavy drinking status was defined as having consumed 14 or more drinks per year for men, and 7 or more drinks per week for women during any of these age periods. Self-reported suicide attempts was lifelong attempt suicide was determined as a yes response to the question, have you ever attempted to commit suicide? Self-reported depressive effect was assessed using the following items from the diagnosed interview schedule. In the past year, have you had 2 or more during which you felt sad, blue, or depressed, or lost pleasure in things that you usually cared about or enjoyed? And social demographic controversies. Factors include education attainment, race/ethnicity, age, and marital status. So in this next slide, this is the ACE experience. We see that it has a lasting impact. As you could see, it affects almost everything. Injury, we see in the first bubble, traumatic brain injury, fractures, burns. Mental health, which is depression, anxiety, suicide, PTSD. Maternal health, which is unattended pregnancy, pregnancy complications, fetal death. Infectious disease, which is HIV or STDs. Chronic disease, such as cancer or diabetes. Risky behavior, such as alcohol and drug abuse or unsafe sex, and opportunities such as education, occupation, income. Kingsley.
I'm sorry, I was talking with knowing that my speaker was muted. Okay, the statistical analysis says that multiple logistic regression models was used to examine the relationship between ACEs and adult mental health outcomes, adjusting for age, marriage, educational attainment, race/ethnicity, and gender. In this, all analyses were carried out by using the R version 3.2.2 statistical software association with individual ACEs. The results indicated a greater dose-response relationship between the expanded ACE score and the likelihood of experiencing drug use, moderate to heavy drinking, suicide attempts, and depressive effects in adulthood. The statistical significance odds ratios were found to range in magnitude from 1.39 of mothers being treated violently to 1.88 of them being emotionally abused. This is the demographic information for CDC CASER ACE study participants waves 1 and 2. In order for them to do this, they had to take in several considerations. For instance, the gender, the race, and the age. On the female, the percentage of the female for waves 1 and 2 were a little higher than the men. The females had 54% and the males had 46%. The race/ethnicity, this study that was conducted by CDC and CASER Permanente, mostly white women were used to do this case study. And as we could see, whites were 74.8%, while blacks were 4.5%. Asian Pacific Islander was 7.2%. Others were 2.3%, while the Hispanics were 11.2%. And this study was conducted with the age ranging from 19 to over 60 years. And the age from 19 to 29, the percentage of it was 5.3%. 30 to 39 was 9.8%. And if you look at the slide closely, you will see that the ages were getting higher and higher. As it got up to 60 and over, it was much, much higher. On educational level, the ones who did not graduate from high school, they had 7.2%. And the ones with high school was 17.6%. The ones that had some colleges had 35.9%. And the ones with college graduate and higher were 39.3%. Now, the prevalence of ACEs by category for CDC case ACE study participants by sex, waves 1 and 2. In the abuse category, the emotional abuse, unfortunately, the women suffered the most at 13.1% compared to men with 7.6%, with an average percentage of 10.6. On the physical abuse section, the women suffered 27% and men suffered more at 29.9%. On the sexual abuse, and unfortunately, women tend to suffer more on that one, which was 24.7% compared to men's 16%. Now, the household challenges, the mother who were treated violently, the percentage was 13.7% compared to men's 11.5%. On the substance abuse, again, the women tend to take it a little harder with 29.5%, while men took in 23.8%. The mental illness, the women was a little higher, or a lot higher rather, by 23% compared to men's 14.8%. The parental separation or divorce, women, it was 24.5%, men 21.8%. The incarceration, women were 5.2%, while men was 4.1%. Now, the neglect part of it, the emotional neglect, women suffered the most, unfortunately, at 16.7%. Men suffered 12.4%. Now, on the physical neglect, men were slightly higher with a 10.7%. While women, next slide, please. Okay. The ACE score prevalence for the CDC case ACE study participants by sex, waves 1 and 2. The number of average childhood experiences score, if you had, in the study says that if you have one ACE score, that women who had one ACE score had a 24% percentage range, 24.5% range, while men had 27.9%. If you had two ACE scores, women who had two ACE scores had 15.5%, and men had 16.4%. If women who had 3 ACE scores had 10.3%, and men had 8.5%. Any woman who had more than 4 or more ACE scores ends up with 15.2%, while males had 9.2%. Next slide, please. As you can see, the study looked deeply into it from conception to death, in which they said it was more like a generational embodiment and the historical trauma from conception. The social conditions and the local context, I guess that is more like the area or the community where they live, and how they treat their child, and the adversities began literally from conception. So it kicks on from there, and as you're growing up, it disrupts the child's neurological development, and of course, the child's emotional and social and cognitive impairment becomes questionable. And of course, as the child, they try to cope with some coping mechanism. They start doing risky behaviors such as drinking, smoking, and taking some illegal drugs. And some people turn to food, and in most cases, the wrong food, the wrong kind of food. And of course, that they begin to develop some social issues and get disease, the next, like hypertension, high blood pressure, obesity, and next thing you know, they have a heart attack, and some of them, and that's what actually causes their early death. As you can see on this pyramid, so the ACE influences health and well-being throughout the lifespan. And the earlier you detect the abuse, the earlier you detect the abuse, the better it would be for you to intervene and hopefully be able to help the child or help whosoever is being abused and to get out of that abusive relationship. Next slide, please.
Okay, for results, ACE score and mental health in adulthood. A series of multiple logistic regression models were specified using self-reported drug use, moderate to heavy drinking, suicide attempts, and depressed affect in adulthood as the outcome variables. There was a graded dose-response relationship between the expanded ACE score and the likelihood of experiencing drug use, moderate to heavy drinking, suicide attempts, and depressed affect in adulthood, which is shown in Figure 1. More respondents experienced mental health problems during adulthood with ACE scores. This is Figure 1, which shows the results of the drug use, the heavy drinking, the depressed affect, and the suicide attempt. Associations with individual ACEs. During adulthood, after adjusting for age, race and ethnicity, gender, marital status, and educational attainment, each ACE, except for physical neglect, was significantly associated with drug use. Each ACE, excluding incarcerated household member and parental separation and divorce, was significantly associated with moderate to heavy drinking. Each ACE, except for incarcerated household member, was significantly associated with depressed affect. All ACEs were found to be positively associated with lifetime attempted suicide reported. This is Table 2, which shows the associations between each ACE and the 4 mental health problems during adulthood. Individuals who reported experiencing emotional abuse during childhood had 5.59 times increased odds of reporting having attempted suicide, making it the largest risk factor among the 11 ACEs tested. The magnitude of the adjusted odds ratios for the remaining ACEs correspond to the following rank order: household mental illness, emotional neglect, physical neglect, sexual abuse, incarcerated household member, physical abuse, mother treated violently, household substance abuse, spanking, parental separation, or divorce. The three strongest associations with depressed affect were found to be household mental illness, emotional neglect, and emotional abuse. Multiple logistic regression models. Household substance abuse, sexual abuse, spanking, household mental illness, and physical abuse were found to be associated with an increased likelihood of reporting drug abuse when included simultaneously in the model. Sexual abuse, spanking, physical abuse, household substance abuse, and household mental illness were found to be associated with an increased likelihood of engaging in moderate to heavy drinking. Sexual abuse, emotional abuse, spanking, emotional neglect, household mental illness, and having an incarcerated family member were found significant predictors of reported suicide attempt. Sexual abuse, physical abuse, household mental illness, and substance abuse, and emotional neglect remain significant predictors of experiencing depressed affect in adulthood. The adjusted odds ratios of the significant predictors in each of the multivariable models were greater than 1, suggesting that exposure to multiple ACEs has a cumulative effect on the likelihood of experiencing mental health outcome of interest. This is Table 3, which shows the associations between the self-reported mental health outcomes and the ACEs. Limitations and implications. Limitations that should be considered: all ACE data was self-reported and retrospectively collected. No casual interpretations can be made. Only associations between ACEs and health outcomes can be established. It is possible that respondents who have current physical or mental health issues may be more likely to report ACEs. The severity, frequency, chronicity, and timing of childhood adversity were not assessed. The ACE module utilized in the CDC Kaiser study focuses on adversities that occur in the home and does not capture a complete array of adversities outside of the home in the environmental context. It is likely that exposure and outcomes were underreported, which could cause bias in the results. Drug use and mental health conditions were based on a single measure, possibly failing to reliably capture the complexity of these outcomes. There was an overrepresentation of older respondents. These results may not be generalizable to other populations. Study population consisted of adult HMO members from Southern California who were primarily white, educated, and upper middle class in 1995 to 1997. In conclusion, our results stress the importance of examining the effects of both cumulative ACE scores and individual ACE categories on adult health outcomes to provide a more complete picture of childhood adversity. Viewing either independently is insufficient. It is imperative that practitioners and researchers recognize how different forms of childhood adversity are deeply intertwined. Understanding how different forms of childhood adversity individually and additively influence health outcomes can explain key risk factors and protective factors. Adverse health experiences can have harmful health and behavior consequences. It is important to stress that ACEs are neither deterministic or inevitable. ACEs can be prevented. Developing safe, stable, nurturing relationships and fostering positive environments can play a key role in preventing early adverse experiences and overcoming the harmful effects of early adversity.
So for Born for Love, when we take a look at Born for Love, we see a lot of different stories that resemble the ACE study. Although almost all the stories can relate to the ACE study, the following stories stood out to us the most. In Chapter 7, Resilience. In Trinity's story, we learn about her being a victim of multiple types of abuse and neglect. A quote that stood out to me is on page 147. Trinity's story shows the incredible resilience of the developmental of empathy and how even on what it seems like the rockiest and most unforgiving ground, This capacity can sometimes bring forth love in abundance. After all the neglect and abuse Trinity has been through, this quote shows how courageous she became. Okay.
In addition to Trinity's story, a situation, and as noted on page 165, the book says that the further result of trauma is the way people attempt to deal with related pain by self-medication or self-soothing with food, cigarettes, alcohol, and illegal drug use. If you read Born for Love, you'll notice that was the case with Trinity, because food was Trinity's substance of choice. On page 167 says that in Trinity's case, her intensely chaotic early life probably set her up for addictive behavior and high blood pressure even before she could consciously make choices about food. Trinity said that she used to eat a lot because she wanted to get bigger and bigger. So this way, her father's friends, when they come to the house, they would not make sexual innuendos towards her. So she said, quote, "The bigger I got, the more they would want to leave me alone." And this is on page 166. So if you follow this chapter from page 164 to 168, it talks about the relationship between ACE and adult mental problems. Again, on page 164, the third paragraph says that as the number of ACEs increases, the risk for both mental and physical illness rises in concert. So as a coping mechanism, some people tend to choose, like I just said, choose ways to either self-medicate or soothe themselves. And for some children who experience trauma usually result in drug or alcohol abuse, or even food as their way of coping with the situation. Next slide, please.
Okay, so this is our class discussion. Basically putting everything together, we put child abuse and neglect are connected to other forms of violence through shared risk and protective factors. This means preventing child abuse and neglect can also prevent other forms of violence, and especially how they would reflect on how they behave in certain encounters as they grow older. You know, using a public health approach to address shared risk and protective factors, we can prevent child abuse and neglect from ever occurring, or just minimizing the amount of occurrence. I did provide some questions for you guys overall. Like, what are some ways that we as a community can help prevent adverse childhood experiences? And if you go to the next slide, we'll go back to class discussion. I thought that this picture, I think this was probably the best one that hits it on every point of how can you better ACE, adverse childhood adversity, in each kind of category. You see, it talks about relationships, individuality, community, and societal events, and how to have a positive effect and basically try to prevent this from happening and becoming much of a issue, a community issue. So Megan, if you want to start the two with knowing the signs and being supportive, this is ways to prevent.
To know the signs and be supportive, you should utilize trauma screening and assessment tools, learn about the resources and services available in your community, and connect with youth and families to services, and also share your experiences. To develop a sense of trust, You should support parents and caregivers, help them find support from other individuals, groups, and organizations, promote activities that support relationship building, educate caregivers on the effects of violence and trauma, as well as parenting skills and techniques, mentor children and adolescents, serving as a reliable adult in their lives that listens and works to build trust together. And also, again, connect youth and families to resources and programs.
Absolutely. And a sense of mastery. Basically, early traumatic experience may cause children and adolescents to develop low self-esteem, poor self-mastery, and it's basically the belief that they're unable to accomplish tasks or develop new skills. I think it's important to work with youth on building new skills and developing a sense of mastery. And basically, a sense of mastery is becoming more involved in different activities that can help strengthen feelings of self-worth and self-esteem. Things that you could do is like sports and recreation, as in coaching and playing together. Let's say arts and music, poetry, lyric writing. Building skills in this sense of mastery, it just helps with leadership and like vocalizing and be basically getting better at academics, tutoring, debates team, computer skills. I think this can protect them against aggression, lead to better social skills and better school and job performances. And as for feeling safe, this is more to the community base of things. In areas where there's frequent violence, it is important to work towards creating communities or places where individuals can feel safe. Identifying safe spaces, building supportive relationships, talking about ways to protect those living in the community, and working with law enforcement and local organizers can help the community and keep it safe. So it just has to do with enhancing community resources and like increasing monitoring and responding capacity. Like if you see something, it's a thin line, but say something. It's like you can change someone's life and the way it's gonna affect them in the future. And it's like, I feel like as a community, we should all like support each other and be able to talk about these things. And not only that, it's like we all play a part in making our community safe. And for the last one, this is Megan, changing the message.
For societal, you are changing the message. You're helping change rules and expectations in society. So to do this, you are to promote, engage, and serve. To promote, you are promoting equality, education, and safety, and promoting conflict resolution skills. To serve, you are serving as a role model in language use and mutual respect. To engage, you are engaging in community activities around the message of changing violence norms, participating in conversations whenever possible to promote peace and discourage retaliation.
Absolutely. So we're gonna go back to class discussion. You think ACE and child neglect and abuse will be on the rise due to COVID-19? So this is when we kind of want you guys to jump in. This was actually a question that came up while we were talking. Like now that children are home with their parents, do you think that there's a rise in like child abuse and neglect? Because usually parents send their kids off to school to take a break and, work, and like, that gap is like basically recharging yourself. And now that they don't have a chance to, do you think they're taking it out on the kids? So if any of you guys want to chime in.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you. First of all, applause. Thank you, guys. And then I will open the whole setup for class discussion. Thank you for the presentation. I'm going to stop recording now.
Okay.